Hello and welcome to lesson 5 of JavaScript. In this lesson, we're going to look at HTML events and the document object model. My name is Mildred. In HTML, when things happen to elements, we call these things events. When a page finishes loading, it is an event. When we click a button, it's an event. When we submit a form, it's an event. When we enter input into an input field, it's an event. When we mouse over an element, it's an event. When an input field receives focus, it is an event. So we have several events, and we want to use JavaScript to do something when events happen. But how do we use JavaScript to access HTML elements? We have something we call DOM, the document object model. The web page is a document. All elements of the page are objects. And so JavaScript uses the DOM to access elements and to detect how we want to react when these events happen. We have events that we can add to HTML elements, like we have a button on the page. I want to do something when this button is clicked. I want an event to handle that. We have something we call the onClick event in HTML, and we want to say on click, we want to do something when it is clicked. Let's say when it is clicked, I want to say documents.getElements, but we want to get this element by saying this, since we are writing to this same button. This dot, we have a property called inner HTML that we have been using, and what we want to do is to change the text from click me is you clicked me. When I save my page and I click on the button, it changes the text to you clicked me. This is one easy way, but this is not the best way to actually use JavaScript in HTML. There are several ways we can do this. We can actually write functions in JavaScript. Like, let's say I have a function called change, for instance, and I want to change, let's say we are going to be getting an element by a particular ID, and all I want to do is to get the id.innerHTML, and I want to just put something like you clicked me again. When I go back to my button, what I will do with the onClick now is to say onClick. I want to call the function to change, and what I want to change is this button. So I'll say change this. So in the last lesson, we called that we talked about the keyword this, and we said that the definition of this changes based on where it is used. In this case, it refers to the button itself. So we are changing this. When I refresh my page and I click, it will say you clicked me again. So we can use a function to say what happens. Apart from using a function like this, we have another way of doing this by adding event listeners. How do we add event listener in JavaScript? We have a method called add event listener. For instance, I want to, let's say on this, I will just add event listener, and maybe the event listener I want to add is for the click event. I'm going to come here and I'm going to do this by using functions instead of just writing it on this page. So I'm going to delete this. I'll leave the ID to be button 1 like this. I am going to come here and I'm going to change this function to a function that says, let's say function greet. This function is a void function, and all it does is to get elements by ID, and the ID is what? Button 1. And we want the inner HTML to have the text hello Mildred. When we come down here, we are going to say document.get element by ID button 1 dot. Now we are going to add event listener, which is the method that we are going to use. The event listener method takes two parameters. The event we want here is the click event, and what you want to do when it is clicked. I just want it to greet, so I'll call the greet method. In this case, I'm not going to put the parentheses when I call the method. I'm going to save this. I am going to refresh my page. I'm going to click on the button, and it doesn't greet. And here this is not closed, so there's an error. And then we save, refresh, and then we click on it, and it greets hello Mildred. The click event is not the only event we can listen for. We have something else called like mouse over. So when we use it as an attribute in the HTML element, we'll say on mouse over, on click, but now it's without the on because we are calling the event listener. So the event we are calling now is the mouse over event like this, and we want it to greet once the mouse goes over it. We want to create another event for mouse out. Let's say we want it on mouse out to say goodbye like this. So I'll create another function and I'm going to call this bye. And what I want it to do here is to say goodbye on mouse out. So it will continue like this. So I'm going to put this here, and on mouse out, so it's going to be the mouse out event I'm listening to, and I'm going to call the bye method here. When I save, I refresh, I go over, it's hello Mildred, mouse out, goodbye. Hover, hello Mildred, out, goodbye. And so this is how we use the event listener. I find that adding event listener sometimes is more convenient than using the attributes on click, on mouse over, on mouse out. So there are several ways, and depends on what you are doing, that you can use this. Now let's go back to the document object model. We are going to revisit events when we start developing our software with HTML forms, and how we use JavaScript on these forms. We are going to see how we use the different events, how we call functions when an event happens on a form, and how we collect form inputs in next week's lesson. When we want to get HTML elements, we use getElementsById method. This method gets the element whose ID is specified in the method argument. This inner HTML is a property that we use to access the to either get or to create a text between the tag. So we have the method getElementsById and we have the property. But getElementsById is not the only way of accessing HTML elements. We have something called getElementsByTagName. So I'm going to delete all of this and we're going to start with that. So it's written document dot we get elements. Now it's plural, so it's elements by tag name, and then here we are going to specify the tag. Let's say it's a p tag we want. When we write get elements by id, element is singular because we know that id is unique and only one element should have a particular id value on the page. But several of the same tag can appear on the page, and so that's why we have elements in plural. We use camel case, which means that the first letter of every new word is an uppercase letter. And so when you want to write your method name, or you want to call a method and you want to remember how to write this method, so we say get elements. Get is all lowercase, but when we start elements, we start the e with an uppercase. When we start a new word by uppercase, the I uppercase, and the rest in lowercase. And so elements here, when we're calling tag name, is plural elements. We call all of the elements that uses the p tag. Let me save this in a variable. Let's say constant elements, for instance, is equal to document.getElementsByTagName p. We want to get all of the p tag, and we want to count how many p tag are on the web page. So we can say let x is equal to element.length. So in JavaScript we use length to count the number of something on the page, and then we want to now say document.getElement. Let's use getElementById. We want to get an element, so we're writing this before we create those elements. By id count dot inner HTML is equal to, we want to print out x. On my web page, I'm going to create, let's say I'll create 2 p tags or 3 p tags for a start, and I'll create a label. So we're just doing things randomly to illustrate the basic concept, and we are not doing anything with meaning. But as we start applying this to software development, we'll begin to do things meaningfully. The idea is for you to get the basic concept before we can apply it to software development in the coming weeks. So the idea of this is going to be count. So we have an element that has the idea of count. We have 3 p tags on the page. We want to count the number of p tags. We want it to be printed on the page once the page loads. And so I'm going to refresh my page. It's going to print 3 because we have indeed 3 p tags on the page. If I add more p tags to make it 6, for instance, it's going to say, okay, this page has 6 paragraphs. So it's counting the number of paragraphs on the page. So when you are designing things like all of these softwares that you use to automatically count the number of paragraphs in a text, maybe you gave an assignment, you want the students to return in 5 paragraphs, you want to randomly count and say, okay, they met the standard of 5 paragraphs. You can also use this for word counts, and we're going to look at that later. But this is how we use get elements by tag name. We also have something that get elements by class name, like this. Let's say we have one of these p tag has the class of let's say call this class content. This button has a class of content. The H1 has a class of content. So we're just trying to count the number of elements on the page that has this style, the class of content. So when I say documents.getElement by class name, I have to put the class name here, which is content. I want to calculate the number of elements that has the class of content, and I want it to be printed out to the label here. So when I save and I refresh, we have 3 of them, and I have 3 printed here. This is not the best application of this, but I'm just showing you how to get the elements, and when you get them, you can decide to do things with them apart from calculating the length. You can change the CSS with them, you can do something about it. Apart from the ID, the tag name, the class name, we can also get elements by CSS accessors. Let's say, for instance, we have this H1 element with the class of content. Let's say we want to get the H1 element with the class of content. So I'll put H1.content, and the method here is going to be query selector all, like this, query selector all. And so this is the method we use. We want to get all H1 with the class of content. So it's going to get all H1 elements that has a style that uses the class selector, and the name of that class selector is content, and then we want to do something with this, and so we're going to use documents.query selector all. We can use object collections, like when we get to forms and form validation, we want to get all of the inputs in a particular form in the input field. There's a way we can loop through all of the items which are the input fields in the form and print out all of the values, and we're going to look at that when we look at forms in JavaScript. We can change the content by using the attributes, for instance. So let's say I want to do something on the page. I can say I want to get all of the elements that has a particular attribute. So let me use A has the href, and it doesn't leak anywhere, so I'll say href equal to, and then I'll close A, and I'll say this is school. When I save this and I refresh my page, I have this school. When I click, it doesn't do anything. I want to access this tag by using the href attribute. I can come here and say document.getElement by let's say ID. So let's put an ID for that element. Let's say ID is equal to, I'll put the ID to be school. So documents.getElement by ID, and I want to get the element whose ID is school dot the attribute name. So I want to change the href attribute, and I want the href to go to a site called https://facebook.com. okay, and let me change the target attribute here to blank. And so this, when clicked now, should open a new browser window and redirect to Facebook. So you can use this in events where you give users option to select something, and based on the selected option, you want to know where to redirect them to, so you can use this. So this has a wide variety of applications. So let's refresh. Let me click on this. It opens a new browser window that goes to Facebook. And so these are different ways of calling HTML elements. If we can actually use this to change the CSS. Let's say, for instance, instead of saying .href attribute here, I want to say .style. I want to change the color of this, the text color of this. I want to change it to, let's say, red. So we can use this to access HTML, and I have it text in red. We can also use this to so in the case of forms, which we are not going to look at today, we will get .forms.form name. That's why every form should have a name attribute. You are putting the form name here to replace, so .forms, and then we are going to put form name, replace this with the name, the value of the name attribute on the form. Input name, you are going to replace this with the value of the name attribute of an input field, and then when you put .value, it will take the value entered into the input field. And so this is what you use maybe for form validation. You want to store it. Let's say, for instance, in JavaScript, we want to declare a variable called, let's say, var first name, and we have a form that is named, the form collects personal information. So we'll say .forms.personal information dot, the input field name is, let's say, the input field, we named it first name, and then we get the value entered into the first name field dot value. And so we are going to look at this in another week's lesson. When we look at JavaScript forms, we get input from the form field, we validate this input before we send them. So apart from using HTML validation attributes, we can also use JavaScript to validate before we send to the server, where if the user leaves a particular field and it doesn't keep to the rules of what we want, maybe the regular expression or the number of characters, we want JavaScript to instantly validate this to get the value and see what the value is composed of, and tell the user immediately that this does not have this. Maybe on blur, on focus, this is what you are supposed to enter. So we're going to look at that later on. But before we do this, we have to look at other concepts that will build the knowledge we need to get into JavaScript form. And so we have like 3 to 4 more concepts before we apply JavaScript to software development. And in the next lesson, we are going to be looking at strings and string methods, number and number methods, before we move to arrays and dates. Thank you, and see you in the next lesson.